I see we are there, and Kristen will give me the high sign to let us know, but we're up on YouTube, so that's the important part.
Good morning, everyone.
Page now too.
Morning, Chris. All right, Kristen says we're good, so we can get going.
Okay. Thank you all for meeting this morning. We're getting near the end of the master plan, and as part of the process, I explained to Jeff a little while ago, what I like to do is go through the narratives and all the pieces and then go back and reconcile them against all the information we gathered at the beginning. So I literally went back to not just the charettes and the stakeholders interviews. I go through all those notes and I make little check marks. Did we deal with this? Did we agree that this, was the consensus that this was not a priority? Does this, is this worth mentioning in the master plan and so forth? Then I also checked it against your previously instituted plans of service as an institution. So the library has their regular plans of service, and the original documentation that was provided to us with backup information that you folks had developed before that. So some of the things were sort of administrative in nature. There were some basic, how-to questions in terms of procedure and what happens in the building. Most of which we had dealt with, or we could handle by mentioning in the master plan as something to develop as we go forward. But there were several items, and I've classified them into a few categories that we'd like to discuss with the committee because they really, in order to appropriately add them to the master plan, we need a sense of how much of a priority these things are. So these aren't things that came from me necessarily. These are things that have come from comparing all of what we've done back to the original notes. So you may say, well, we've sort of let that slip and that's not a big deal. Or, hey, yeah, that was a priority. We really should at least mention it. So if I may share screen, as I say, I've grouped these into a few categories, and we can go through them if that's okay with you.
You should be able to share your screen, Paul.
Okay, so you should have a Word document that says finalization questions with the committee and board of trustees at the top?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we're looking for is a direction so that I can, in the narrative, give appropriate weight or just make it a footnote and mention it. But these are some things that had come out. The first category is the studio. Currently, you have the TV studio that in many ways, the consensus has been we've sort of gone away from it in terms of what we've done with the plans. We did not recreate a TV studio, certainly not a public access, in the traditional sense, TV studio. Technology has changed the way that we use those things a lot, although one of the staff comments from a recent discussion was profound in the sense that it is a great space because of the soundproofing and the fact that it's acoustically separate from other areas to do other things. So maybe what we do is focus on better soundproofing and acoustic insulation in the perimeter of some of the Sohos and conference rooms, and then they can be used for videotaping the oral history project or for doing things like that. But I just wanted to be clear that in all of our conversations, we haven't really come out and said, oh, wait, where's the TV studio? We need to put that back. No one, to my knowledge, has said that, but it is mentioned in early staff interviews. It is mentioned in some of your plans of service early on. So what I'm looking for is feedback from the board members as to whether this is something we can address in flexible space that does other things, or do we need to go back to a committed TV studio? And I'm hoping that Jeff and the other regular staff folks also have some input on that if we need clarification. Jeff, did I miss anything in that conversation? You and I talked about this.
Yeah, no, I think that's basically it.
Okay.
Any thoughts? Do we have something though, Jeff? Is it called the Makerspace Studio, the one where the for me personally, my daughter, I know, went to the studio and used digital cameras and things like that. So we still have that space, correct?
Well, we have a makerspace. It's the, right now those items are in the studio, and that's that space we call the studio makerspace. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
And then the question is more, if that equipment was available in another space that wasn't the studio, but had some sound insulation and had that equipment in there, does that do what we need it to do, or do we need the
Sure.
dedicated space for the public access studio itself?
I mean, I had noted that we were moving that or using the space that it's in currently in other ways, and just sort of assumed that we were just calling the maker space something a little different, but that it would serve the same sort of functions and maybe more than what we have currently. I think early on when we were talking about all the issues with the studio, that was something that we talked about was, we wanted to give people more access to technology and self-service kind of technology so that it wasn't quite so, a barrier where there's a person sitting there and you're having to work through her or him. And, I think adding soundproofing and making sure that there's space that can be used while other people are in the space, that's something that I think would serve that function, but I don't think we have to have a studio per se. Just my 2 cents.
That's well put, Lisa. If I could just add to that slightly, that's probably the best way to put it. We're not getting rid of the function or even some of the equipment necessarily, but we're sort of using it in our minds in rooms that also are doing other functions. So we want to make those rooms that they can be used as a studio. So we'll improve, as I say, acoustics and so forth. But having said that, in the same way that we don't really do projection rooms in libraries anymore, having a dedicated, this is a studio and nothing else, unless you had an ongoing daily, public access cable thing running out of it. I think you can do the types of program things you wanted to do in other rooms, and then actually not pigeonhole that space for one thing and one thing only. But because it's a political question, sometimes, you know what I mean, that the public says, wait, you used to have a studio and now you don't, and my family donated money for that originally, that we want to make sure that we're all on board with, that's how we're handling it.
I do want to say that the channel itself, the guts of the channel and the signal broadcast, we broadcast or cablecast out of the IT office. So that channel function is also not tied to the studio space. It's
okay.
We separated those functions. So that's happening now. That's, all.
Ironically, the studio isn't even used for that thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
The channel is just mostly computer, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think as long as you have 1 or 2 rooms that are soundproof, you're fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do then is designate, if there's a consensus here amongst the committee, I will mention that the studio as a parochial space is going away with that label, but that the functions will be distributed amongst other rooms that we add better acoustics and soundproofing to, and look at flexibility of moving equipment from room to room when we need it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
No objections? Okay, good. All right. The second one also has some political undertones. In our budgeting for each of the phases, we have certainly included various sustainability ideas. That is, improving the efficiency of the mechanical and the electrical systems, better controls that allow us to use energy when we need to, but not on all the time. Better insulatory values within walls, not just for sound and acoustics, but for thermal insulation. However, there are different levels of representing sustainability. So we do those as a basis of design. If we're doing a renovation, we try to accommodate those things in as reasonable a manner as possible. If we're doing additions, we absolutely do them at a higher level than is required by the energy code. Just as a public building, you sort of have to take a leadership role in that, and it reduces operating costs. But there are certain ways of documenting sustainability. One that you've probably heard of in, on the radio, if you listen to NPR or read newspapers, or is LEED certification. This is a process that was developed that essentially it's a points system for various things that you do. And during a project, you would go about trying to implement those points by documenting them. I will say it is not inexpensive because it's often difficult to get contractors to do regular paperwork. Getting them to do the extra level of paperwork for LEED certification, where you have to document, as an example, not just where, who manufactured this door, but where did the lumber come from that made the door? Where was the forest that harvested the tree that made the door? And so we can do that. We can make, that part of the specification that they have to provide all of that information, but it does come at a cost. And at the end of the project, you pay to establish all these things and make the application for LEED certification. I would say every library I've worked for, even the ones that began with, we want to be LEED certified, as we went through the process, we even began it several times. It became one of those things that the decision was made, well, let's do the things that would give us LEED certification and be a good neighbor and even talk about it. So there might be storyboards or, learning panels in the lobbies, things like that, but not necessarily go to the extra expense of doing all the documentation and paperwork to get a plaque that says this is silver certified or whatever it may be. That's a priority question. It may be important to you as a community to say, we do have a LEED certified library. There are other ways of establishing the sustainability practices that you implement and that you value. And in fact, it's in your plan of service for the 2019 to 2022 draft plan of service. You see in item 4, it actually outlines NYLA's Sustainability Institute, which is another way of documenting the types of things we've done. My recommendation is that is an achievable practice that makes sense in the context of the library world. It's not putting libraries up against other buildings like an office building where the company is, that's their mojo is that we're sustainable. So we need the LEED certification as part of our branding. But I think things like the NYLA Sustainability Institute, plus the fact that we're doing these things anyway, would be a reasonable means of trying to achieve that. But it's not my library, it's yours. So I wanted some feedback on that. And item 5 was photovoltaics. I think we've discussed it. It is difficult in New York State because photovoltaics, generally the funding sources for them, the incentives are done as tax credits, which don't help you as a library since you don't pay taxes. So the most common method of implementing it is to essentially, I'm simplifying things, rent your roof space to somebody who installs it, sells you the electricity back at a reduced rate, and so forth. I'm not saying that's not worthwhile. Steventown Library, tiny little library over in Rensselaer, Columbia County, must be Rensselaer.
Yep.
Yeah, they have it on their roof. They pay $18 a month in electricity. That's fabulous. And it's one of those things that's very visible. People see it and immediately know, hey, look, they're doing something, even in this small town. But it is a little more complicated, especially on a bigger building like yours, to work out how that happens. Generally, there's some legal things. So just wanted to open that discussion on sustainability, how you felt about it. It has been listed as a priority in your plans of service and in other documents we found. It also did come up in many of the conversations with stakeholders. So thoughts on how to prioritize that, how to mention it, how to budget for the documenting of it. We've already budgeted for the inclusion of many of the systems, but how do we document, or how do we budget for documenting to the level that you'd like to document?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I think as far as lead certification goes, I don't frankly think that we're going to get the marketing bump to justify the cost and the effort. I'd rather invest in the energy saving technologies and then brag right to our community about how little we're paying in gas and electricity, right? Just put up the before and after numbers and show that we're being responsible with their money and good stewards. I think the photovoltaic question, my understanding from the architecture of the library is on the roof, we can't really put enough PV on there to make a dent in our electricity usage, right? Given sort of the way the library faces, the tree covers, etc.
Yep.
It seems like maybe a better way to address that, and I would love to see us get into PV, would be to get into one of those agreements with people who put solar panels out in the field, right? And community solar type arrangements, and you basically lease from them, right? So that we can advertise that we are buying green electricity without having to put it on the roof directly.
Again, that can be part of a public relations campaign to explain how you're supporting that idea and technology. I don't disagree. It is a fallacy to think that a library of your size could provide all of its own electricity. You don't have enough roof space or even area to put trellis on your site to get that many photovoltaic panels to do it. So a lot of it in some ways is a gesture. In a smaller building, like Steventown's an example, they can do that, but you're a whole different beast.
I mean, if we could find a way to do a small amount of PV, in the parking lot or something, right? Carport type arrangements, right? I think that'd be nice. It would send the right message. But
maybe the way to talk about it then is
do it other ways.
This provides enough electricity to run our community room. Like we pick one thing, even if it's not directly feeding from that to this, we could do the math and say, this is how much it provides, this is how much that uses, and it would be something graspable by the community. That's interesting, Harmeet. It sounds like what you began with in terms of the marketing bump is consistent with what I was saying. Let's do these things, but the plaque on the wall isn't cutting your energy bills by itself. It's the things we're actually doing. Any other thoughts, other board members?
I agree with Harmeet on that.
Okay. How about the NILA Sustainability Institute? That's a much less intensive process. It is consistent, as I say, with libraries in New York State. There's a lot of effort that's been made to make that a manageable process for libraries. Is that something my thought is I should at least mention it, and we should talk about it going forward as we implement each piece. Anybody have feedback on that?
It's just one of those places where, I mean, we just put the draft plan out, our renewed draft services plan. And this is one of those places where the services plan touches on the building plan in a pretty substantial way. Sometimes they kind of move on in their separate paths, but this is one of those areas. And that's why this conversation is important, because it kind of is this a thrust or is it not a priority? And I, Paul, I appreciate that that's going to get, designed into whatever the building is. And I agree with Harmeet and Mark that it's the, how much are you saving? That's good. But there's a question there about the marketing and the perception in the community, whether that's an important aspect of what we're doing from the services side too, not just the building side.
Right.
Yeah, my thought on that is that we should definitely try to get as many of the practices incorporated or mentioned in the plan. I agree with Jeff. It's not just a physical plant thing. It's also a service type thing. But I think we're at the front end of this a little bit. So I think we should stay at that. Stay in the leadership position there.
Okay. What I'm going to suggest then is that the language in the master plan, I may do a section specifically on this, but says that at each stage of implementation, we should evaluate the cost benefit of going to higher levels of sustainability and so forth, so that we're saying part of the master plan is during development, we keep looking at it at every stage to see what makes sense to do. But it's not necessarily a priority right now to go for LEED certification, but we should look at other programs like NYLA's program or even local programs. The power company often has incentives and so forth, and try to tackle those as we see the opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I'll refer back to your plan of service and say that the two should continue to be updated in harmony with each other as you keep going forward and developing each of them, that maybe they should each check back with the other planning process every, however often they get put together. Make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Good. Any other thoughts on sustainability before we move on? Okay. I'm going to move us down to storage. For the most part, storage is usually a question related to administrative and staffing because they have the most familiarity, obviously, with what they need, how much they need. I will say there is never enough storage in a library, except Wisner. Interestingly, did you go to Wisner with us?
We did.
Did we
Yeah.
do that one? Okay. Rosemary is one of the only librarian I've ever met who said, we actually have too much storage. I think she almost says it just to get my goat, but nobody else has ever said there's enough storage. My philosophy, which I think I've mentioned before, is to try to parse storage out in areas throughout the building so that storage is located in proximity to the areas where it's needed. So rather than one or two central storage rooms, I prefer to create storage in each program area. For example, in the meeting room, lots of storage built around the perimeter or in closets right off of it. In the children's room, same thing, so that they're nearby and staff isn't traveling to get them. Having said that, storage again came up in an earlier plan of service, your 2015-2019 plan of service, where, particularly in discussing outreach. And outreach as a program and as a philosophy has certain implications. But in my case, what I'm thinking of is, what does this mean in terms of the building? Because those outreach accoutrement, they have to go somewhere. They have implications for where they are near delivery spaces, or will somebody be parking near that and have to load and unload and so forth. The latest plan of service mentions pop-up library services as an outreach program. Same questions, how are we doing this? How much of a priority are there? And in the same way you put a contingency into a budget, in some ways we want to put a little space contingency into the plan to say, okay, we're going to have to add storage in some of these areas because we know these things are coming up. So it has, as you can see, is there staff parking necessary for these things? Is there storage within the building necessary, or are some of these things slipping off the priority list because of changes in service and they're not as important? One of the big questions, what are future library plans for owning vehicles? And do they have to be parked in a garage or in the parking lot? Those have implications, of course. And then the technology and plan of service and the makerspace, there's lots of storage related to all the different pieces that go into that. So thoughts on those things? When we discuss the plans, we're usually discussing the sexier things, the areas where the collection might be, where people sit and enjoy space, the programs, things like that. But this storage has to go hand in hand with making all of that work.
And it is an important question because from the service plan, right now with COVID, we're trying to, pretend that we're, imagining ourselves a year down the road and what that looks like. From a staffing standpoint, outreach is an expensive service because you're paying someone to be elsewhere, but then someone still has to be in the library to do all the things the library typically does, right? So this is it's a premium service. And so it's again one of those places where the service plan touches the facilities plan, because is this something where we see the library going in the next 5 and 10 years, that we see the librarians and the staff being out in the community in the places where they're meeting people who aren't traditionally maybe the library users. But at the same time, none of that allows us to stop anything back at the library, where we still have to continue to do all the regular library stuff that happens. So it's it's an expensive service, both from a staffing standpoint and from a building standpoint, where if you're going to have sufficient location to, we don't have a vehicle in the garage now. We used to, but now that garage space has been used for literally every other thing that we've needed to do, including curbside and all the other services that we're doing. So anyway, it's thorny and difficult, and important.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't get through the master plan and then 2 years down the road, somebody says, what about this SUV that we've been talking about buying for the last few years and we finally bought it? Where's it going? No one thought about it.
Right. And we have gone back and forth infinite times, and Chris is on here. She could tell you, an outreach vehicle van, not the, we use our current van as an outreach vehicle ish. Right. But also a truck for the maintenance department, and all those things. Is it important enough that we would be saying, oh no, we're definitely going to have a pop-up graphic covered outreach vehicle with power ports and all of those things to take out to out into the community, and
right,
some amount of collection that goes with it. So those are bigger questions that we probably we haven't really handled yet, but it's important that we talk about it a little bit. It doesn't have to be today, but we in the services plan and in the master plan. So
right.
For me, I would think that storage inside the building would be much more concerning than an extra parking spot, because the parking spot, we can just take one from the parking lot. We can't just automatically build an extra closet unless obviously it's in the plan. So, and I know, especially in the children's section, they need a lot of storage. So I guess I kind of assumed that in the plans there was already storage planned, closets and
oh yeah,
things like that. Oh yes, you're saying, Paul?
Yeah,
okay.
I didn't want to imply we didn't have it. I just wanted to make sure that we were incorporating enough for future plans, that things like that, like outreach that we might not even know about from our perspective, but rely on the board to say, this is where we're headed in the next few years. But certainly, yes, traditional and existing library programs, we've listened to the staff, we've made enough accommodation, as I said, like a contingency that we can fit storage here and there. I didn't mean to imply we don't have it. I just wanted to know, are there some things lurking that we need to know about, so that the bottom one there, the emerging technology. Hey, we're planning on buying 10 high-end graphic computer stations with movie production software and green screen. Where's all this stuff going? If those are things that we need to know about.
Gotcha.
So sorry if I misspoke, Michelle.
No, that's okay. I just remember visiting that library where they said they had enough storage, and they did not have enough storage. Everything everywhere.
One person's clutter is another person's full library.
Yeah. All righty.
Yeah, take a perfect example of an emerging technology. We've kicked around the idea of. I'll give you two quick examples. It's just small. One was sort of a wide format printer, so it would print like on 3-foot rolls of either plastic or window clings or paper. Whether use it for the library, but also make it available to the public. A piece of equipment like that, most people are not going to have in their homes, but you might want to have in the library. We've never bought one because I don't really have a place to put it. Where I'm not willing to give up the space that we're doing other things with in order to put that in there. So there's one example, or something we've kicked around having, a 3D Glowforge, which is a sort of negative carved down either plastic or wood or whatever. But there's fumes involved with that. So if you're going to have the makerspace, you have to have sufficient exhaust in that particular room to make sure that people aren't in there with the fumes as it's laser etching or whatever.
Right.
So those are just two teeny examples of the sort of thing that are service driven, but it has building implications.
I mean, I don't remember, as we've worked through a lot of the design changes, whether I recall we've had a lot of conversations about stacks and shelving and that kind of stuff, but I don't know that I've heard from staff in terms of whether or not the added storage is sufficient to kind of envision what we're thinking about for the future. So I don't, if anyone wants to comment on that, I'd like to hear it.
We're always going to say there's not enough storage, but the question is, adding space to say what goes in order to get us storage, and that's the difficult decision. If we're not adding, it can be easy to do those sort of things when you're adding a ton of space. And our plans, that's not the way these plans are going, where we're, adding, hundreds or tens of thousands of square feet to the building. So every little bit of storage that we get to make our lives a little bit easier to manage the library takes away a seat or a small study room or something else from someone in the public. And that's that zero sum game, unfortunately, that we find ourselves in now. So
I think
I
though,
mean, I
we do want to make sure we have a minimum, or well, actually, I think you'd want more than the square footage of storage that you currently have.
yeah.
Has anyone done that math?
Yeah,
Right.
we have. As I say, certainly the largest single addition obviously is the community room, and it includes not only specific spaces like table and chair storage in proximity to that room, but then built-in storage around the perimeter of the room and so forth. Those are all assumptions we've made in the design and in the budgeting for it. So yes, I would say that in each space we have met more than the minimum that we would typically provide. But as Jeff said, it's a zero-sum game. At some point, there's a proportion of storage to occupiable space. It's not going to be 50-50, right? You're not going to have as much storage as you do, then you have an airplane hangar essentially. So yes, I think we have a reasonable, based on current library trends. My main question had to do with not asking you to analyze that, but what are the big storage needs that you see on the horizon because of what you've been discussing in your plan of service to your community that maybe nobody thought to bring into this process yet? We don't have to necessarily even change any designs for it, but we should at least mention it so that as we're looking back at this document and we say, all right, we're ready to implement, let's say phase 1 in the community room. Oh, wait, there's a note here that says there's the possibility that X may happen. Let's try to make sure that we're adding that type of capacity, whether it's power distribution, data, or storage space and shelving or capacity in some way as we implement each piece. So it's more to be mentioned than to change the design at the moment. But if you haven't really had many of these conversations from a plan of service perspective, we'll rely on what we've seen there and make accommodations as a contingency that going forward, we should be thinking about pop-up library services. Maybe your next plan of service as you develop it will be more specific about exactly what that'll entail and ideally where it would be located, and then we can incorporate it.
I will say table and chair storage sounds like a dream.
Yeah. It makes all the difference in the world about how usable that space really is when you don't have to just stack stuff in the corner.
Yep.
I also just would have mentioned that in terms of circulation, when we think about storage, we think about working storage. So, how we deal with all the things that we're processing that are bigger than a book that require charging. And I think a lot of that is built into workroom design, which we're not quite at that point yet. So,
yeah. No, that's an excellent point, Catherine. And in fact, that the next section deals with technology and recharging stations. It's exactly that idea. We're not at the level where we're deciding where every outlet is or pencil drawer or anything else, but we do want to make sure that we're mentioning it so that as those things develop, we're constantly, just like this process, referring back to the previous pieces. we want to refer back and say, oh yeah, we want to, this is going to be an important thing if we're recharging laptops there or returning, devices. Those are things we want to deal with. All right, I'm going to, if it's okay with everyone, I will make some notes that will get added to the narrative to review, basically for each section, but I will probably make a separate section regarding storage, so that it's a note that in the development of any phase of it, that should be checked with staff and with the committee as we go forward. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's sort of a catch-all. That way, it's there. Make sure we're talking about it and don't let it slip.
So Jeff, I mean, as far as the plan of service goes, have we compared the services we are talking about in that plan to the current expansion discussions we've been having to confirm that there's nothing left out?
No gaps.
We're getting that process going right now, and I think that's why this conversation is important. So that's where we're at right now. We're looking at, in the current plan, the draft plan that you guys have in your hands. I think it fits into the master plan, because while we were developing the service plan or redeveloping the service plan, it was with the knowledge of where we generally were in the facilities plan. Those two things, that wasn't a vacuum, unlike the first draft, which was happening largely in a fundamentally different place. We hadn't had all the conversations that we've had to get to the point where we are now on the facilities plan. So I think it seems good. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I don't see any major holes in it for, oh my goodness, Jeff says that we're gonna have a 60-foot volcano for programming out there, and we haven't made room for a 60-foot volcano. I think we're close and aware. Yeah, aware of the limitations of what we're talking about for this facilities plan.
I will say, in all the master plans I've done, there's been more attention to your various plans of service here in the discussions of the space needs than there have been in almost any of the others. So part of that is the sophistication of your staff and administration, that they've been on top of that. But it's been part and parcel of many of the conversations along the way. So I haven't felt the need per se to go back and say, wait, have you thought of this, as much as I might have in other locations. But this was just a check against the written documents, and just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. So.
Okay, so if we could, before the next board meeting, right, where we're going to lay out the phase 1, phase 2, right, kind of a long-term plan to the rest of the board, if we could at least confirm that there's nothing in the service plan that is abandoned, right, by what we're talking about doing in phase 1 and phase 2, I think that's a pretty good place to be, right, to at least be able to confirm that at the completion of those 2 phases, we have created the space to do everything that our service plan says we want to do.
You bet.
And if there's something that's not covered, then this is the time to talk about it.
Yeah, it may well be that the outreach plans, which we dialed back from where we were headed pre-COVID, that may well be the sort of the hanging curveball there. So we'll take a peek at that and have a discussion with you about that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it'll be on the table at least. It won't be something that gets lost. It'll be something to be upfront. Okay. Okay, good. In moving down, and we had sort of alluded to this a little earlier, there are several technology components that we haven't necessarily gone into detail about. They're easy enough at this stage of a master plan, which is conceptual in nature, to accommodate. But this was just discussed in terms of the working stations at CERC and in back of house spaces. Recharging and storing patron access infrastructure like laptops or Chromebooks or devices like that. We know that throughout the building, we've already budgeted for improved electrical distribution and access at all locations, as well as wireless. We know that in the work areas, we want to improve storage and in-place charging. So those are all things we would definitely, again, part and parcel, just like the sustainability question. The bigger question is item 12, which is RFID. If we are going that route, this would be the time to plan for it rather than trying to retrofit that technology and system back into a building that's already been designed. So I'm going to take a step back there and first ask, is everybody familiar with the various things that RFID can do, that it should do? There are differing levels of the use of that technology, and it's used for different purposes. Should we review that quickly before we go further, or does everyone have a good working knowledge of RFID and what it does?
Yeah, I think we've talked through RFID before, so at least we're all passingly familiar with it.
Okay. So if we were concerned about it, that it's not a security question, which is one way to use RFID, but is a means of improving the efficiency of returns, receipts for returns, and sorting. These are all pieces that might involve equipment that should go in or near circulation in that back of house space. In some libraries, the automation of that is actually something that gets highlighted, showing how libraries are sort of technology forward. It's fascinating for kids in particular. It's one of those inherently interesting things. It's a significant investment, but it's also, without question, the direction that library technology is going in general. Not every library is there, not every system is there. So what are the thoughts of the board members about whether that's a priority? I will say it is not, we did not budget the technology for RFID into the building plan budgets that we've talked about. We can carve out the spaces to do those things, again, at the sacrifice of maybe some other things, but the cost of the system itself and the tagging is not in the budgets that we put together. That would have to come out of a different pot.
And from my perspective, yeah, like you're saying, security system is not something we're particularly concerned about. The self checkout we have now. It could be better, and certainly with an RFID it would be a little bit easier and smoother. But we've got a working system now. So all of the patron forward customer service parts of this, we have managed to make work without it. The dollars of both the expense of implementing it and the long-term benefit savings on the backside are with the check-in machine, the automated check-in and sorting machine that would do some of the labor of managing the check-in process, which is complicated, and then sorting those items out into, this one goes back on the shelf, this one needs to go on hold, this one goes in transit to another library. Some of those things that we're using, people for now to do those things. Those are, that is a very political question, and it has implications. And again, it's expensive both from the point of the machine. It's expensive in that there needs to be space dedicated to that, which is probably the reason we don't have it now. Is we looked at where this thing could possibly squeeze into the building, and there just isn't a good spot. So so it's a good discussion to have, and again impacts those. This one's more operational than services. So
far better to have this conversation now than after we've started to implement some of those things.
Right.
Gilderland talked about it, put it aside, and then came back to it much later than would have been ideal. So
okay.
Yeah, it's nice at this point if we're saying this is the direction we're going and we know it. That's not that you have to make this decision right now at this meeting on Thursday morning, but the master plan should, if we think that that's a better than 50-50 chance of developing over the next few years, which coincides with the first few years of implementation of any of the master plan, we should be planning for it as we go forward. So that, just like anything else, it's better to be preparing than trying to pick up the pieces afterwards.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, is there an interim step we could take to say, I mean, I'm not sure that, I know that whether we're ready to go for this, but is there something where we can set it up where it's eligible in the next couple of years to happen? You know, is there a physical plant change we have to make or not make? You know, like, I guess I don't understand.
I,
Yeah.
From my perspective, it would be, you know, what we would say is if this is at least a 50-50 or better chance that we're, you know, we would look in this direction,
Yeah.
then it would be just really horrible for us to miss the catch and say, hey, Paul, let's at least leave this as an option on the table when you're designing those staff spaces. Make sure that there's an accommodation for this to go someplace. If you looked at our building right now, like I literally don't know where I would shoehorn in that sort of machine. They're big and they're loud and they need some space to themselves, and it has to be a place where people are going to throw books in. So it has to be, you know, touching the public space as well. So, you know, if it seems like something we want to do, and certainly, you know, I proposed it a couple of times, and Catherine has, and you know, I think there's benefits to it, but you know, we're always just this very liminal size library about the benefit of it. It's, you know, you can do it with people, or we can do it with a machine. If it was larger, you'd have the machine. If it was smaller, you'd never think about it. It's just, we're right in that middle size. It's interesting that Gilderland came back to it. That's a piece of information I didn't have. So that's that's where I am. I guess, you know, from my perspective, I'll put my 2 cents in. I think it is, I would like to see some provision for the possibility of it existing, and maybe some thought into, you know, as we sketch out a schematic to say, you know, this is where this might go, you know, and this is what you might lose in order to carve out enough space to do that and still have enough room for the humans.
But that's far better than designing all the space for humans and then later saying, by the way, we're cutting half of that in order to make this happen.
Right.
Then it's much harder. Okay. So I'm going to leave it on the table, if that's okay for everybody. That doesn't mean we made a decision, we're doing it or not doing it, but it'll be something that'll be listed as a consideration that should be discussed at every implementation phase, again, so that we're not cutting ourselves out of the decision later. Having said that, it may mean, I think it would be worth maybe continuing to do some background so that you're ready to have that discussion at some point when it does make sense to pull the trigger or not. And it's not coming out of the blue, because by definition, other things will be taking priority then. If you're getting ready to do phase 2 of the building project, and that's staff areas, and we say, all right, are we doing it or not doing it? And you haven't thought about it since, you know, May 20th, 2021, you know, you're not going to be ready to make that decision either. So I don't want to send anybody on a useless committee either. But there should be some thinking ahead as to what are we going to use it for? What would that system be like? And then we'll be able to plan for it when we get there.
And we took a pretty good look at this. I want to say, you know, I'll probably say 3 years, and it's probably been longer than that. But I think, you know, Catherine, I'll tap you to maybe freshen up those plans and take a look at just the current status of what those systems look like.
Sure.
Okay. If you do have any documentation, Catherine, and you want to share it, you know, we can start thinking about it a little bit. Again, I'm not going to go changing all the master planning for back of house space yet, but it'd be nice to have that attached so that we know in the future it's right there with the master plan, and we know, okay, we're going to try and do something like this, or it's a starting point. Okay, good. We have another political question. The Friends and the book sale, the charrette and the public identified the book sale as a priority. The staff interviews mentioned it, but I didn't get a sense of it should upgrade or downgrade either way. But it is not something we've necessarily focused on. We've certainly talked about the capacity to do book sales in the community room, outdoor tent areas. I mean, there are lots of opportunities even in the smaller spaces, but you know, if this is a priority, this comes back to the storage question, because it's not just storage of books, it's sorting of books, and many libraries don't want that in their building. by definition, the things that get donated are often problematic to be in your building. They are musty, they are pet smelly, there's all sorts of things. And fully 50% of it might be thrown out rather than actually put into a book sale. My wife is head of the Friends at the Lisa, at the Greenwich Free Library. Can't tell you how many times they've had TV guides donated from previous years.
Right.
So are we going to look at the book sale? Is the Friends group even without a book sale? Does the Friends group need space that we haven't thought of yet? Should we be thinking about another space as a supplementary building, an annex? If we're taking down the house next door, there are other things like the washer and dryer for stuffed animals and linens for the meeting rooms and a dishwasher for cleaning toys. But what about storage? You use that for storage right now, and do the Friends need something like that, or does the book sale need something like that? Is anybody on the Friends?
No, but well, I am. But effectively, I think we just had a book sale this past weekend, and it was as low effort and low impact as could possibly be imagined. So we worked really hard to have as few staff hours dedicated to it as possible, while allowing the Friends to run it within the organizational capacity that the Friends have currently. And they're viewing it as an opportunity. They would like to have something more than what we were able to do this past weekend. They still raised $2,000, which is great. But I think the community and the Friends know that there's a lot more untapped potential there, especially in our community, both a desire to donate things, and then a desire to have a book sale that's larger and more robust. So I always, in the back of my head, imagined that the house property and some kind of, so you said in here they got a couple sheds from Home Depot. I happen to have a couple extra sheds from Lowe's that I am thinking about putting over there for the Friends to be able to store their stuff on right now. But if it had the ability, that space had the ability to allow for receiving donations, sorting donations, and then in my wildest dreams, some capacity to have the book sale event there, whether in the tent or whatever it was, I would be ever so happy. I don't know, and this is where we need to have our conversation is, what's the priority for the library to support that? Again, we can kludge it together out of some of the pieces that we've got now, or does it rise to the level of something that needs to be supported a little bit more formally? So that I can be done talking about that now.
Yeah, no, in a way, that's what we're looking for board direction on, is how much of a priority is this? It's more a political question than a financial question. $2,000 isn't a make or break for your budget, I presume.
That's right.
I just wanted to note, I don't know that it's been discussed by the Friends group, but a situation, and of course they're closer to one another, but like in Colony, where they have basically they're using space over at the crossings where they're having their sales every week. And, I kind of wonder whether the Friends have thought about whether there are opportunities like that to pursue in our community, separate perhaps from our space, maybe over on the town hall space over there. I don't know. But has there been any discussion about that, Jeff? Because they have a great setup.
Yeah, and they have a core of some incredibly dedicated volunteers who are willing to basically treat it like a job. That's, I think, a rarity, and it hinges on a few people who are willing to be super dedicated over the years. I'll take, our garden volunteers are like that, right? That year after year dedication. And I think our Friends are interested, and I'm not saying they're not dedicated, but just they're interested in building that capacity. So it's not, I don't think it's there yet where they have enough people that they could pass that off and make that not completely onerous. but they're interested. And I know that, every time they have a successful book sale, that builds excitement, and then that can build more friends coming in to help them, and then that builds the capacity. And I think that relationship is the important one. So
It's a good community PR thing, and that more importantly than the money that it brings in is the, book lovers are book lovers, whether they use the library or buy used books or have way too many on their shelves at home. So.
Right. But to answer your question, Lisa, no, I don't think they've either considered having a remote over at the the farmers market or at the town hall. I don't think that's come up again, just with the level of schlepping and staffing that would require to make that happen. I don't.
Right.
We
So
might switch.
something more similar than maybe what Voorheesville has, where they have the outbuildings and they're basically, they kind of use the space in front of those sheds for their sales. So.
Right. And we don't, we don't have any place where we would be accepting donations at all right now. We've done it once, and it was just into the community room the day before and then back out, do the community room and everything goes back out. There's no space for them to have those materials long-term.
Okay.
So in terms of priority, what I'll do is I'll add some notes to think about it as a site question more so than an internal building question.
Yeah, I think Michelle was saying something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was on mute. I didn't realize that. So
thought-
I was just going to say, I think what we're saying is that, yes, they should have some space, or they need space, but we don't have it. We don't have extra at this point, unless we're doing something with the Borthwick property. And then too, I haven't heard that there's been any problems in the past with the various creative ways that they do it now.
Yeah, and you're right. No, I think what they do, if the answer is there's no space at all, then we work it. They work it in sort of ways that it's been similar now, and we say, hey, this is great. That people certainly enjoyed the book sale that we had this weekend. They raised $2,000. A lot of people there's a lot of excitement out there, and we say that's what this is, and that's what it will continue to be. But we've talked about the desire of the people to want to donate their stuff is very powerful, and I do annoy people by shoving that off pretty good. We got the big green bin out in the driveway that's full at the time, and then we just that's not a function that we do because we just don't have space to be storing people's books. And it's a good question to have, to say, is that a priority enough that you're going to work on that Borthwick property? Is it possible? Is it not important that, like, nope, the book sale could be the way it is, and we like the friends the way they are, and that's good. That's the question, But that helps me, 5 years from now, when I get approached by someone who's like, you should have a huge book sale, and I get those comments a lot. I know that people want it. We're not in a situation to be able to provide it. So.
Yeah, my opinion is you don't want to use indoor space to the library for that at all. I mean, if you can put up sheds, or we could get 8 sheds and put them in the parking lot, take 4 spaces or something, make it happen that way. But as far as like the footprint of the indoor space in the library, I wouldn't use it. I don't think it's a priority at all, frankly. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Great. I appreciate that direction. And it's always a tough call because there's so many demands on space and budget and resources. So thank you for helping clarify that. What I'll do, I'll send this document to Jeff to distribute to the committee if you want to go through it in any more detail and think about it and pass on any more notes back through Jeff to me. But I'm going to use the notes that I took today and keep working on that. Do we have the dates set for when we were going forward to the board? Is that? Forgive me, I don't remember if we picked a date or not.
I don't believe we picked a date.
No.
Yeah.
I think we were kind of going to see, so the next board meeting is that, I think it's June 14th.
June 14th. I wrote down a half hour to an hour at 6.
Yeah, so the question is, do we feel that we're in a position to be able to present that to the full board yet at June? That's the operative question right now.
What would be the presentation? Like, what do you anticipate using as a document to present using a half hour? I mean, that's not a lot of time, so.
If I'm going to keep it to a half hour, what I would do is a quick rundown of the community input summarized, mostly via graph, a few graphs to show here's what we heard between the stakeholders, the charrette, the dot exercise, the previous surveys and everything else. Here's the needs that we've identified. Here's the needs we identified with the existing building. And then graphically, here's how we propose to solve those over a series of phases going forward. We won't get into the weeds on questions like this that are at the committee level, especially if we have a half hour to an hour. But I would anticipate presenting for 20, 25 minutes and then opening up to questions. But essentially, it would be the graphics that we've been looking at in terms of the direction for the building plan that you've seen. If it's going to be that short a meeting or that short a dedication of time, we don't have time to go into much more than a passing review of that.
Right.
And I think people, if they weren't on the committee, there's not going to be as much interest in all the underlying pieces of that generally.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I worry that
the hours enough time.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I can guarantee an hour's not enough time, or a
Right.
half hour isn't enough time.
Right.
I
Okay.
guess if I start at the end, right? Ultimately, we want a board vote, right, on adopting the long-term plan, right? That's how this process completes.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, so certainly there's going to be an hour's worth of presentation and discussion to get to that point. I think we should just expect to need an hour for that. And Paul,
Yeah.
if you can get us the material to this committee prior to that,
Right.
a week or so before, so we have a chance to go over it and anticipate any questions to make it go smoother, that would be the way to handle it.
I will endeavor to. I am going to be out of town the week of Memorial Day, so I'll be back the week of June 7, so then I can be able to get it to you that week. Do you have a July meeting? Does that make more sense, or should we? No, let's stick with the June. It's up to you. I don't know if you feel like as a committee you need more time to look at it, at the presentation aspect of it before it goes to the rest of the board.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my sense is that it's going to get there's a lot of questions. So it'll be like a couple board meetings that we have to go through this. So I think we should do something at the June meeting. I don't know what that is, but there should be some sort of like whet people's appetite, kind of set it up, and then try to plan for like August or September, July, August, September to have, I don't know, some sort of discussion. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, that's just my sense of it. There's going to be a lot of, a lot of people on the committee, which is good, but there'll be a lot of like questions that come out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. What do you guys think? What everyone else think on that?
I wondered whether it would make sense to discuss it in conjunction with the service plan so that you can see kind of how they fit together.
Yeah.
Because I feel like one without the other is kind of, it's not a full discussion. And as much as that would likely be a much longer meeting, I think it would give people the opportunity to get, who haven't been on the committee or are new to the board, to get a better understanding of kind of what the long-term vision is for service as well as the building. And I think we have heard from a few people on the board that they like to have that in person. And
Right.
so that sort of, I think, speaks to sometime over the summer, maybe. Just a thought.
Yeah, because this committee, we haven't come back and discussed the services plan. I mean, you've got it, but that's different than us sitting either on Zoom or in person and having that discussion and going through what our thinking is. So does that make more sense? Like we want to pencil that in for July?
Yeah, probably.
What's your meeting date in July? Is it the second?
The second Monday.
Okay, so the 12th.
That would be the 12th. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't be at that meeting. I don't think so.
Hmm.
I could be remote maybe, but if we do it in person, I won't be at the meeting. Which is okay. I mean,
We can
And-
set you up on a screen.
right.
August will be the 9th.
All right. So let's plan we'll pencil it July, I think, July or August. And, we'll come back as a committee and talk about the services plan. We'll have a separate meeting for that. We'll do that relatively soon and see how these things marry up. We'll go through, we'll do our analysis, make sure we're, got our I's dots and T's crossed. And then we'll bring those all together and that may be more of a marathon meeting to have both of those things in a discussion. And if we can do that in person by then, I think several people would like that. I'm not sure if that's universal, but that's, I think, certainly been expressed.
Is it possible sometimes to lighten the rest of the agenda for the board meeting so that you can focus on this and not worry about also having to get to 20 other items? Or
Yeah, I mean, we got the president and vice president right here, so I think we can definitely kick off a bunch of that stuff as long as there's nothing an emergency, other than the regular financial stuff and personnel. We can buzz through that if you have to. We've done that before. So
so I've made sure that in my calendar I don't put anything else on June, July, or August. But you can let me know what the as you discuss it at the committee. Let me know what the priority is.
Okay.
Are we still thinking that we do want to talk in June, or did you just push it to July?
it feels like July to me. That's what I'm hearing. But
Yeah.
by the time we do the plan of service, in addition to this, and think about how to present all of it, because my feeling is I'm not the one to present your plan of service since I didn't develop it.
No.
I'm happy to talk about how it relates to this.
Yep.
As we have, but okay, so we'll talk.
We should try to get, I think, information. If we're gonna do July, we should try to get information out 2 weeks if we possible before.
Yes.
So I mean, I think, I think it would be helpful, and I think people will read it, or like not just like the day before would be helpful, because I think people will gonna need time to go through it, develop questions, that kind of thing.
Maybe that's the more important thing, Mark. Thank you for that.
Right.
Just that sort of third week in June. If it were the 12th, it'd be okay. If it was the fourth week in June, figure that a pretty good final draft of the facilities master plan is to us by the fourth week in June. That way we can get it to the full board and they can sit with it, because I know people like to sit with it ahead of time. They just
They do.
I just put down June 29th in my calendar. It's
Great.
the Tuesday that's 2 weeks before the Monday board meeting, if that seems reasonable. Okay. So we'll shoot for that, and we can plan on a committee meeting to go over preparations as well as we get.
You got it. All right. Sorry. And so I know we're over here. I'm sorry about that, but I have a public comment, which is very rare. Hardly anybody ever sends me anything. So this comment was from Robert Khalife, who is a citizen of the district. And about the long range plan, he says, I understand it's still in very rough form. I noticed the potential price tag for the draft plan presented by the architect at the most recent meeting is, if you add up all the phases, is 17 million. That's vastly higher than the Gilderland Public Library budget for their construction of about 9 million. I realize it's probably not apples to apples, but it's a proposed plan for BPL so much more extensive and warrants such a higher price tag. I would like this particular bullet point to be in the public comment, if possible, to present at the next long range plan meeting. So there you go.
Okay. I'll make a note of it. They are vastly different scopes of work and sizes, but yes, we'll I'll talk about that because it's an immediate neighbor and it's because of the proximity and the fact that it's something that's happening right now, people are aware of in the news. So
Yeah, I just wanted to, I didn't want to have an answer. I thought I needed to talk to you, Paul, and have that, he wanted it in a public comment. There it is. And then we wanted to talk about that. So.
Good. Okay, thank you, everybody. Sorry we went a little over an hour today, but this is some good progress in terms of trying to finalize the documents, and we'll be talking soon.
All right.